Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Senator Patrick Colbeck. He is currently serving his second term in elected office as the state senator for Michigan's 7th District. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan with bachelor's and master's degrees in aerospace engineering, as well as a graduate of the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. Included among his over 20 years of engineering and management work in a variety of industries. He has worked on systems for the International Space Station and instructed students at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center's Space Camp. The senator is a co-founder and board member for the Freedom Center Hospitality Centers at Metro Airport, as well as the Troy and Lansing military entrance processing stations. The senator has received numerous awards, including the Senator Paul Fannin Statesman of the Year Award and Legislator of the Year Awards from the Senior Alliance, Police Officers Association, and Associated Builders and Contractors. He lives with his wife of over 20 years, Angie, in Canton. Welcome, Senator.
Great to be with you, Paul.
So let's get started. What's your view of crony capitalism, or maybe your definition of it?
Well, I think that's one of the key principles that I'm going to be running on in this upcoming campaign for governor, and that's is that highlighting that we need principled solutions that treat all of our taxpayers, all of our citizens equally. And crony capitalism essentially is when you're going off and trying to provide an unfair advantage to one group of people to the detriment of others. And we've had quite a few examples of that lately in the legislature. We've had a series of bills, and you always got to wonder when something's called the Good Jobs Bill, just like we have something called the Affordable Care Act. It wasn't affordable, it wasn't caring, but it was an act. Well, Good Jobs Bill, you have to look underneath the surface. And that was set up so that you could, companies that were eligible, and that was limited to 15 companies that would get this special tax break, and they would essentially get the ability to withhold the income tax for new employees that they added to the rolls. Now, the idea of getting new employees, that's a good thing, right? So,
right.
And the fact that they understand that the idea of tax breaks and lower taxes actually incentivizes job growth, good thing. The bad thing is when you make that only eligible to just 15 companies in the state. What happens when that company moves across the street from another company that didn't get that tax break? Is that fair? And our Michigan Constitution is pretty clear. Under Article 1, Section 1, our laws are intended for the equal benefit of all of our citizens. And more often than not, that just does not happen. And so for me, it gets a little frustrating when I see policies like that are promoted. I believe in broad-based economic development policies, which means that if you go back to healthcare for a second, you go off and promote policies that actually lower the cost of healthcare. And that's something that I've been doing across not only the state, but actually nationally as well, and getting free market enthusiasts around healthcare and getting the cost out of healthcare. And we've done this with a system based on direct primary care. We can actually take 20% out of the cost of healthcare minimum across the board on it for people, and we're actually deploying that in our Medicaid pilot. But if you took 20% of the cost out of healthcare, what do you think that would do for economic development? That's you could call it a tax break if you wanted to, but really it's a healthcare break. And same thing for electric choice. If you took out 20% of the costs associated with electricity, for some businesses maybe it's not as huge an impact, but for like data centers or for major manufacturing companies, I mean that's a big deal. And a lot of those guys do get special deals directly with utilities. And then lowering income taxes, right? I'm about $1.5 billion away from taking the $9.7 billion income tax that we have and defining a pragmatic, rational path to eliminating the income tax altogether. So got to get to 1.5 billion, and I don't want to do this generic, take a 5% cut across the top or whatever. that would get us easily to the rest of the cut, but I want to actually get pretty tangible. So I'm trying to give people some very specific ideas. So it's that broad-based economic development policy that is very important. And if you do that, these companies that are coming in here don't have to worry about the paperwork hassles and trying to go off and justify. They dedicate an accountant to going off and justifying their tax credits that they want to receive at the end of the year. There's none of that hassle. And when you do a broad-based policy like that, not only do businesses benefit, but I have a feeling some families are going to benefit from lower health care costs. I have a feeling families are going to benefit from lower electricity costs, and families are definitely going to benefit from lower income tax and hopefully the elimination of income tax. So that's what I talk about in broad-based economic development. That is much better than this crony capitalism that gets kicked off. And the another thing you can do for economic development is, I call it time is money economic development. My background in management consulting is around project management. And if you keep the government off the critical path for the development, so between the idea for a business and putting a shovel in the ground and opening up the doors, if you keep them off the critical path, now you get to the point where businesses can open up faster. There's no permitting delays. You try to treat people as good actors, and the ones that fail to comply with it, well, they're going to be a big penalty if they don't do things the right way after the fact. But right now our system kind of assumes that they're all guilty, and then they have to prove that they're innocent along the way. It'd be nice to kind of flip that around and treat our people that want to start up businesses in the community as customers, and actually treat them as we would with any customer walking into a store, and get the government acting more like the government works for us, not the other way around. And that's a basic principle, philosophy. You're going to hear the term principle, and you're going to hear the term principled solutions a lot in my campaign, because I think we need to aim higher. We got to get out of this special interest-driven policy discussion which we're on, which leads to things like crony capitalism, and get back to the basic principles upon which our country was founded.
Okay. Now, I just would like an explanation. You're against crony capitalism.
Yep.
And I'd like to hear your explanation. In 2011, you voted for Senate Bill 855,
Yep.
which gave a $50 million state subsidy to Townsend Ventures to make systems related to electric car batteries at the former Ford Wixom plant.
Okay.
Why did you vote? That seems like an unfair.
Yeah, it does. It's back in 6 years ago. I want to clarify that. Was that part of the Senate Bill 556 package or no?
I'm not sure. It says Senate Bill 855. I'm not sure if it was a package of bills.
So some of these, in general, when you get into a lot of these discussions, and film credits kind of falls into that bailiwick, because I was dead set against film credits in the industry. There's this, there's a meter. Is it moving it the right direction or the wrong direction? So some people just look at a bill and do a keyword search on it and say, hey, this is dealing with film credits. That's bad. Well, what if the bill's actually ratcheting down the film credit and taking it down to the point where it's not as attractive anymore, or you're pushing it out? Well, that's actually a good vote. I mean, if you just go in there and just reflexively hit no on anything due to a keyword, well, you're doing a disservice, because you may actually stop some policy that's heading in the right direction. So I got to admit, on that one, I don't recall the details of it, but when I'm not a big fan of any targeted tax credit. So,
Okay.
That would have been my first year of service. So I don't think we would have. There's some bills. There was a bill package out there a while back on. When you look at the write-up in certain vote tallies, it says that every bill in this package did something specific on it. But you'll find with me is that I may see a whole bill package, and I'm going to go off and drill down and say, here's the bad one. Here's the one that creates a new entity. This other bill is tie-barred to it, which means it's connected to it, but it's maybe improving transparency. So if you're going to pass it, I want to know where all the money's going. I'll vote yes on the transparency bill, but I'll vote no on the one that creates a new authority. So,
Which you did,
yeah,
with the most recent, I think.
On the good jobs bill, I think.
Right.
One of them was transparency.
You voted yes for the transparency, but
Yep.
no against the others.
Yeah, and that's kind of a pattern of mine. I truly do my best to read through and understand each and every bill before it gets out there. I'm actually one of the oddballs that even read the Federal Affordable Care Act all the way through. So I'm, as an old engineer, I used to read a lot of specs, and those are very thick specs because I worked with NASA and government quite a bit. and they love their paperwork. So I think it's helped me go off and get an affinity for where are the key elements of all these different proposals, and not just take the analyses, perspective of it, or even what some of the special interest groups will say about it, but actually go off and say, is this doing what they said it does? And sometimes when you read this is legalese. So I'm an engineer, so part of it is they use terms that are canned, that have been used in law for a long time. So sometimes you got to pop up and say, all right, I just don't get this. Let's find out what's going on. But a lot of the time it's very clear, and you've got to go. You won't find that out unless you actually read the actual bill. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten criticized for votes on a bill, but it doesn't do what somebody says it does for the criticism.
Okay. You also voted against, and that was in May of this year,
Yeah.
giving road salt contracts to Detroit Salt Company,
Yep.
not the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
So again, that kind of indicates and it did pass the House,
Yeah.
even with you voting against it. But basically, it would allow the state to pay 8% more to Detroit Salt Company.
Yeah.
Even though Detroit Salt Company is owned by a Canadian holding company.
Yep, it's a prime example of crony capitalism. It's just so frustrating on all. It comes through, well anyway, the way legislative process works, I'm actually writing a book right now, and part of that book is going to talk about how government really works, so people can get an idea of where bills originate and how they originate. And most of the bills that I've actually introduced, I've actually authored. I said, here's what we need to change, show me what the current statute is, and we'll go off and change it. And takes a little bit longer to do it that way, but another approach that a lot of legislators use is say, they talk to a lobbyist and they'll give them a bill that they want to run and they'll go off and run it. And I don't work that way.
Okay. Now, I've talked to a number of, Stop Common Core people. And they're very upset with the bill you've introduced. They call it a fake repeal, and want to know why you're not supporting House Bill 4192 introduced by Gary.
They're not paying attention. On multiple venues, I've gone off and expressed support for House Bill 4192. And the funny thing is, the same provisions that I'm accused of promoting a fake repeal bill with Senate Bill 826 revision are the same provisions that he took out of House Bill 4192. So I was accused of promoting a fake repeal bill because I removed two provisions that I thought would not get a majority of support in the Senate. One was around tying policy to federal funding strings, and essentially it would say that we're not going to accept any federal funding if they have strings associated within our education system. I agree with that fundamentally. There's nothing in Article 1, Section 8 of the federal Constitution that says that they have any role in education. I get it. But if I were to go off and try to promote that with a governor who hasn't seen a federal dollar that he hasn't liked, it's not going to get signed into law. And I'm frankly more interested in repealing Common Core than I am about just trying to hit the reset button on federal funding to states regarding education. I want to get the Common Core out of there. The second thing was a concurrent resolution requirement that we had in the bill for new standards and assessments, and I took that out in this revision that they're claiming is a fake repeal bill. It's because, and by the way, I like that provision personally, but we took it out because we had Senate Majority Policy Office that said they were concerned about constitutionality of that amendment. Now, I don't agree with their argument on that, but the fact of the matter is, I do not have any chairmanships this year because of two reasons. Number one, I oppose Medicaid expansion. Number two, I oppose Common Core. So the Senate Majority Leader is not a fan of mine and not a fan of Common Core. And so if I go off and try to promote this on the Senate floor, coincidentally it did get stopped on the Senate floor, and that was an opportunity for the Senate Majority Leader to move it. He didn't move it. If I would go off and try to promote items in the bill that the Senate Majority Policy Office has said was unconstitutional, that's low-hanging fruit for the Senate Majority Leader to go in and push the caucus that would otherwise support the legislation and repeal against me and against the bill. So I had to take those provisions out. One was for the governor, the other was for our Senate caucus. And so the big issue came in essentially when I said, guys, I I reached out to the Stop Common Core group initially when I was going off and doing these revisions. And when I got an email from one of the ladies in there that says, I would rather have no Common Core bill, anti-Common Core bill passed than one that is, features any revisions, I said, you're tying my hands. It's not worth the time of day right now to go off and have further discussion on this. And by the way, because I have people that are detractors that don't want me to get this bill passed in any sunlight at all, I'm not going to have this debate on social media. Because they're going to go off and find all the different kinks in the armor, all the points of controversy on it, and they're going to use that to go off and incentivize all my colleagues that I need the vote for this bill to get Common Core repealed. They're going to use them to make sure that they're opposed and they're not going to get the vote. So this is an example of probably the worst case of legal or of legislative advocacy that I've ever seen in my life, is that the people that I'm trying to help by getting a full repeal of Common Core are the ones that are attacking me the most for trying to repeal Common Core. And that's not the way it's supposed to go off and work. If our bill, as I had revised it, that they're calling the fake repeal bill, but now it's a constructive solution under 4192, if our bill would have been put forward, I have a national expert that worked with us as well on this legislation, it would have been the strongest anti-Common Core bill in the country. And it's just frustrating that it's kind of devolved into this. But that's actually one of the more frustrating aspects of my public service to date. When you're trying to do something first of all, I want to give those ladies credit for highlighting the issue associated with Common Core in the beginning. They were phenomenal at going off and bringing this attention about this issue into the legislators' minds, because before that, this whole Common Core thing was done before I actually got into office. So the State Board had adopted it before, so it wasn't on my radar at that time, and they brought it to our attention. So kudos on that, and kudos on all the details and data that they brought to it. They were very sensitive because some other states, like Indiana, had gone off and done a fake repeal bill, and it was another keyword discussion again, where they said, oh, well, I'm talking about revising it, so it must be a fake repeal bill attempt again. And then they go into campaign donations and say, oh, you took money from this group, so you must be on the take, ignoring all the other times that I've been against those interests at the same time. And anyway, it's extremely frustrating. And the worst part about it is that the people that said that they're advocating it have been the biggest inhibitor or barrier or hurdle to actually getting that reform passed. And it's anyway, disappointing. But I would love to be signing a bill into law once I get into the governor's slot here that formally repeals Common Core from Michigan, and ideally replaces it with the pre-Common Core Massachusetts standards that were out in place, and when Massachusetts was the #1 education state in the whole country.
Okay. Well, you mentioned, signing it as governor. Let's tell the audience, in case they're not aware, you are running to be the Republican nominee for governor. Yeah,
absolutely. We just had our launch this past week, and attended by over 500 very excited supporters from all over the state. And we've been active since May 31st that's when we actually filed. July 22nd is our official launch. And now we've been active at just getting the word out that they've had somebody that's actually been in the crucible public service, that's actually been defending their best interests over the special interests in Lansing. And a lot of people can get very jaded about their representation at times. They're looking for somebody that's actually going to look out for them. And this is a case where we've actually done that. I don't know if I still got it, and I don't bring it here with me, but we had a compass when I first got elected that I wrote down 10 principles that we'd evaluate every time a bill came before us that was complicated. And it'd keep us on the straight and narrow and stay consistent with our campaign promises. And I'm happy to say that my head sleeps well when it hits the pillow, and because I think we've done exactly what we said we would do. And as a result, I've been designated the most conservative senator in 2016, 2012, and top 3 in all the others. And it's just by going off and making the case that the people's perspective on this matters. And so when they say no to a tax increase like Proposal 1, 81% of the voters said no on it, they probably meant no. And that wasn't a Republican or Democrat issue. That was a very bipartisan rejection at the hoop. So to come back 2 months afterwards and propose yet another tax increase without a vote of the people, that's not showing respect for the people that we're supposed to be serving, and especially when I had offered solutions on how to do it without increasing taxes. So I think, yeah, that governor run's pretty exciting. I think it's going to be, there's a couple other candidates that are rumored to get into that. They've had one poll associated with this race so far that was performed by Mears, and in that survey, they did not mention my name in the survey. They have done polls with my name in it, but for some reason they're not popping up in any of the public announcements or anything. But in that particular poll done by Mears, 62% of the electorate was undecided, and that was with 2 statewide office holders on the ballot right now, and they almost split the vote, effectively split the vote, the remaining vote. And you can't argue that they don't have statewide name recognition. I mean, they've been serving public office statewide for over 7 years, so name recognition can't be the easy, and it can't be the issue. They've been in public office even before that. So what it tells me is that the people are seeing what's on the shelf and they're not buying. And for me, that's a big opportunity for somebody that's got a track record of, in the crucible of public service, of staying true to what he ran on for office. And just like President Trump is doing right now, he's going through systematically all of his campaign promises and making sure, to the extent that it's in his power to go off and do it, he's making sure that he executes on it. And that's something that I've been very consistent about in my service as well.
Okay. Let's get back to Common Core for a little bit.
Yep.
It's my understanding you co-sponsored and voted for bills that allowed private organizations to amass a profile of personally identifiable information on students.
Yeah.
Why did you?
That's not true.
That's not true?
No, it's a bad analysis. I think it's Senate Bill 33 and Senate Bill 510 from the last legislative session. First of all, before that bill came in, there was no statewide protections of any of that for student protections at all on data. Those bills, it comes down to interpretation. It gets into a lot of details of the actual bill. There are third parties that are involved in it. There's specific administrative intent associated with the legislation. It's focused on usage in the classroom and by education authorities in Michigan Department of Education on it, just so that they can identify what trends are going on in the individual schools. But it's not to go off. Some people have said that it's actually sponsored by Google, but actually they were the ones that tried to kill the bill, and they were using groups that were sensitive to these issues as their what's a good way of putting it? They were using them to actually go off and try to advocate in opposition to this legislation.
So like proxies.
Yes, and they were not aware of that, and so it's kind of frustrating that some of this stuff kind of takes on an urban legend, if you will. But fact of the matter is, I was the only person when it came to the appropriation. There was a $51 million appropriation, and for the federal government to introduce a longitudinal data system so that they would have all that data. And I was the only one who voted no on it in the appropriations, and I earned a black helicopter pin from my appropriations chair for that vote because I highlighted how that data was going to be used. And so I'm the only one that I know of that's on record as saying, enough with this stuff here. The government should have more, that people should have more information about the government than the government has on them, and that's a simple approach that I like to take. And I authored, there's a transparency legislation I offered my first term that you can see the fruits of it actually, and as an accountant you'll like this. It's called, I created a website called 10millionaccountants.com, and there's 10 million residents in the state of Michigan, that's why I called it that. So people can go up and drill down into detail on each one of the government departments, each one of the agencies, all the individual programs. You can get a breakdown into core services, into, i.e., the reason for that agency. So for state troopers, it might be patrol hours, something like that. Support services like IT, HR, accounting, like the means to an end services. And then work projects, which are not necessarily spanning one fiscal year, or they're not part of the steady state operations. They're designed to improve it or retract it or whatever the case may be, or change the state of the operations. So that's, and it breaks it out by contract costs, by facility costs, by staffing costs, by benefits. All that information is up there. So if you go to 10 Million Accountants, you can get some good data.
Okay. So we're running out of time. We didn't get through hardly anything, but we have a few minutes left. So,
But wait, there's more.
no. I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell the people why they should select you to be the governor.
Oh, I appreciate that, Paul. Well, as an aerospace engineer, I kind of look at the world a little bit differently. For the first 44 years of my life, I was going off and working on some of the most exciting programs, the most challenging programs that that face our world, frankly, not just our nation, not just the state of Michigan. The International Space Station, working on some virtual reality training systems for our Department of Defense, make sure our soldiers were prepared for war. Anything that people said was impossible or challenging, those were the projects that I wanted to be on. And frankly, right here in Michigan, we got a big problem. We got to restore respect back for our system of government. And the problem is that we have not been following the principles that we state on our campaign literature. We have not followed the principles that are captured in our Constitution. And I'm happy to say, I believe, and there are a lot of people that would share this sentiment, that I'm actually one of those rare breeds of elected officials, and I don't like the term politician, but elected officials that's actually gone in and adhered to what I said I would go off and do. And you can go off and track for yourself my record, the floor speeches. I've written over 63 editorials. Go to morninginmichigan.com, and all that stuff is up there for the public record. I'm actually one of those rare elected officials that's going to be running on my record, not running away from it or trying to rebrand it with something that polls in the 80s and everybody gets excited behind it for a little short charge there. But once you get into office, they took their eye off the ball on everything else that the person was doing. I'm focused on everything that I was going off and doing. And you were hitting on some, I appreciate the questions you were asking because it hits on some areas that people are going, that frankly, there's a lot of false narratives out there. And there's a lot of folks that are close to the system, close to understanding, they understand what's really going on. So if I'm elected governor, we're going to have Michigan as a free market, the center of a free market healthcare revolution. I've been working in the national level and the state level to make that happen. You can check out some of the articles that have been published by Forbes.com on that topic. We're also going to fix our roads, and we're going to do so without increasing taxes. We're going to focus on building higher quality roads. What a concept. If you do that, you have lower total life cycle costs associated with it, and we can actually spend less money on roads than we are today, and you see less orange barrels, and the roads are going to be in perfect shape. So a lot of things around there, and you'll find that you'll have a consistent defender of civil liberties in there. First Amendment, Second Amendment, all the amendments, making sure that we're protecting religious conscience. We're also protecting our right to bear arms. We're protecting the right to life. And fundamentally, my Choose Life license plate, regrettably, was vetoed by the governor. That would have helped mothers facing unplanned pregnancy as well as folks struggling with suicide. And so you're going to see somebody that's actually going to go off and defend the principles that made us into a great nation. And you can find out more at Principled Solutions for Michigan. Look forward to seeing you along the campaign trail. And everybody else who's listening, just come on by. Go to colbeckforgovernor.com or principledsolutionsformichigan.com. There's an events tab up there, and you can find out where we're going to be next.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I don't think any of your opponents would have the nerve to, but I want to thank you so much and wish you luck.
Hey, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Senator.
God bless.